one thing that you can do to help increase the sophistication of your model railroad design and to overall up that design game that you have and to increase realism is to use easements. Now, easements or spiral curves, depending on the literature, are simply just a transition between the straight or tangent section and a fixed radius portion of a curve. To help you understand a bit better what easements are, I'm going to use an analogy using highways. Some highways, like here in Oregon where I live, they use spiral curves, or easements are used at the beginning and ending of curves. You can tell when these occur because the radii of the curve will tighten as you come into it. This will allow you to be able to coast into the curve, then travel a fixed speed through the main part of the curve, and then the curve will start widening on you come out, then you'll be able to accelerate out of the curve. This will allow you potentially to use less braking on one hand and less acceleration on the other, making it for a nice smooth drive. In the comparison, not every agency would use spiral curves. Some will just use circular curves. In this case, there is no transition, which means if you're traveling the highway speed, you will have to immediately make a harder braking on approaching the curve, because that curve radius, that restrictive curve radius, hits immediately, and then slow down while you travel the whole length of the curve. And you won't be able to power out of that curve until you're clear of the curve and accelerate out. This being in a repeated motion, you're going to have potentially a lot of hard braking and harder acceleration. And all that's going to do over time is potentially your passengers may have to do something like this to prevent a case of car sickness. Now, for railroads, the geometric principles are the same as for highways. And for the railroad, this is going to be allowing easements will allow higher speeds in and out of curves, and an overall much smoother operation. There's not going to be these kind of lurch type movements, sudden lurch movements that could potentially shift loads on freight cars, which can create potentially a safety situation, or in the case of passenger trains, violently throw passengers off balance, which could cause injuries. And this obviously, and since real railroads use easements, a good way to increase your overall design sophistication is to use these for your model railroads as well. Because again, you'll also be able to use higher speeds on your layout, and then again you'll also improve the chance that you won't have derailments. Especially if you're using steam locomotives or long freighter passenger cars. For steam locomotives with the pilot trucks, if you have a sudden lurch into a curve, it's very easy the chance that pilot truck's going to pop off the rails. There's a much greater chance of that happening without easements. And for long passenger cars, again, there's a increased chance of a derailment with a sudden movement into a curve from a straight. Either you might derail the long car itself, or it may derail the car that it's coupled to. So these overall things will allow you to improve realism on the layout, improve things without getting into some operational difficulties. Now, also everything's in this video kind of trying to simplify what was some of the material covered in this book. It's a track planning for realistic operation. This is a great book to have. If you don't already have one, or in almost any version of this is good. A lot of the videos I have on my channel cover this book. Maybe you want to get into a little more detail. This is a good reference. And it's also important, while the geometric details are also covered, you can also find textbooks like the surveying textbooks. You'll find things on easements. And this one has some of the principles that are covered in this book. We're not just trying to get into rigorous geometric design of horizontal curves. So we're going to get into this, trying to follow this in a bit more simplified steps. There is some geometry involved, which are doing best trying to get to improve the overall understanding of this topic. Now, typically, easements are typically these things that is applied to more freehand and more applicable to railroads that use flex track. However, there is a variation of simplification that can be done for sectional track as well. For sectional track, you're going to be replacing certain pieces of a curve with higher radius sections. So, as an example, here is a section of this is 4 pieces of Cato 282 millimeter unitrack in N scale. This is about a 11-inch radius. This is so the pertinent things about curves like this. This is a half a circle. There's 360 degrees in a circle. There's 180. There are 4 pieces. So each piece is a 45-degree piece. So for a basic easement, what we want to do is we want to replace the ends with a higher piece of radius track to get kind of a eased curve coming in. Now, not every radii or track system has 45-degree curves. Typically, a lot of them, like Atlas, for instance, for HO and N, you'll use there'll be 30-degree sections because there'll be 6 sections for each curve, and each piece of these is 30. You can do this. You can do this by replacing. If you had 6 pieces, you can replace piece 1 and say piece 6 could be replaced with a high radius curve. Then the 4 in the middle could be your sharper type curve, or with 6 allows you could have your curve, your piece 1 and 6 could have a broadest curve, and then piece number 2 and 5 would be a medium, a second easement type curve, and then the middle 2 pieces, 3 and 4, would have your sharpest curve. Now what I've done is we kind of laid our sections of curve on a template just to show. So here we have the four pieces of 282 millimeter of the 11-inch shown, and this is generally shown as a 22-inch diameter. If we want to create a kind of an eased circle with this, I have the option here. The next highest up is a radius of 315 millimeter. So we can do this and then simply all we're going to do is replace the end curves, again, the curves 1 and 3, or the curves 1 and 4, with this larger radius curve. And then we're going to put this on. You'll note here from the center lines of this, slightly, the center line, you'll note that this curve now is actually slightly larger, and we have an overall diameter of 22 3/4. We've actually made it slightly wider, and this curve on the back is almost displaced about an inch further. But here we can give there's this curve coming in is somewhat it starts as a broader curve for it sharpens in. And this is the one advantage if you were using sections that had 6 pieces, is then these pieces for each chord going from here to the 90-degree section point are shorter. So instead of having 2 pieces of each curve, you could have your broad piece being here 1/3, then your medium piece being 1/3, and then the sharper piece, the fixed piece, being 1/3, for instance, going through this 90-degree curve. So that actually would allow a more of, again, a smoother type of easement. And again, it really depends on the track sections and the system that you're using, how much radii you have. It also would note that depending on the geometry of the manufacturer, There may be half sections, and half section or a third section, and these may be decreed, and maybe it might be a 15 degree or a 30 degree along with the 45s. You only have a third type section or a half. You could use multiple combinations of these as long as you still maintain the 90 or 180 degree curvature. Use of true easements. This is where flex track is typically going to be employed. Now, this work in here is following the kind of the principles that are laid out in this book. However, it's going to be trying to simplify as much as possible. However, there are still a number of steps. It is going to take some practice to do these, but you'll get better and better in time the more of these get laid out. So really, the first step is to draw the circular curve. Again, this is that fixed radius curve, and typically you might this is going to be typically a board where you have a trammel kind of thing, like I might have here. You have a nail in one end and the pencil on the other end, and you just take this and spin this around to your fixed radius curve. But you want to draw that fixed radius curve first, and that's with radius r. So that's your curve as you come around. The second thing you want to do, you want to draw a larger offset curve, and this is that easement offset. And typically for this offset, on the average, it's going to be floating around a quarter inch for N and about ½ inch from O. So it needs to be about a quarter inch larger. So you're going to set your trammel or your radius to be slightly larger than what you'd typically draw. And then you want to use a pencil and draw that, trammel that out. So it's parallel to your previous curve, but further out. And third, what we want to do is we want to attach your straight section that comes into the curve, attach it to the end of that larger offset curve. This is technically, I'm calling here the BOC, the beginning of curve, the beginning of the transition curve. You want to make sure we want to attach it here at the beginning of that curve. The fourth step, and I have sub-steps to break this down, if we want to be able to easily locate the midpoint of our easement transition curve, where the midpoint is marked by M. To do this, we're going to need to define our length of our transition curve, which is generally defined by this straight length between the beginning of a curve and the end of the curve through this distance L. L on the average, and again, these are averages, just to simplify things. In N scale, this is about 8 inches, and it's about double that, about 16 inches in HO. Now, there is a plus or minus 2 inches for both. Generally, if you're looking at sharper curves, so for instance, if you were running like a 11-inch curve, or 18 or 22-inch curve in HO, potentially you could get away with easements an inch or two less than the 8 or the 16. These are for average length curves. So if you're up in this for HO, or example, in the N, if you're up in the say around 13, 14 inches, you're typically going to use the 8. And same thing here. So if you're running these minimum curves of 24, 26, 28 or so in HO, it's probably closer to the 16. And then broad curves, you're going to want to do is try a little bit larger. So in N scale, this easily could be the 18-inch radius, and then 36-inch radius in HO, as for example. You want to go a little bit on the larger side. Now, of course, if you end up being that you're trying to do a curve and you may say, I should be 8, but I can only get, say, 5 or 6 inches out of it, that is okay. It is better to have some sort of a transition easement than than none at all. And then conversely, if you have the ability to extend this L further than this, then that's okay too, because the longer you extend this L, the longer this curve is, the broader that transition curve, the more smooth it will be. So the purpose thing is, once we kind of figure out what L you're using that can fit in your particular point, we want to use half of that distance to find the midpoint, which is L over 2. So the L over 2, half that distance, will be used to locate the midpoint and our end of curve. So you'll start with the beginning of the curve, draw a straight line till it intersects that curve of this distance. If you know that this is 8 inches in N at 4 inches, you're going to draw a line about 4 inches until it basically intersects that curve. That is going to be the midpoint M. And then you're going to also then use the same increment, same example like 4 inches, from this out to the end. This is again the end of the transition curve here. This will allow you, now you've located the critical midpoint and the end of curve point. As we lay this out, this midpoint was on the curve. You actually want to put it about halfway, because it's technically halfway through the curve. We want to put it halfway between our fixed radius curve and our offset curve. And we'll note that again, the beginning of curve point is attached to the straight section, in the sense that we have a radius here that is infinite, because it's technically straight. And then our end of curve point is actually attached to our fixed radius curve. We had our R before. This is the end of the transition, because from the beginning, our transition goes from this tangent, from the straight, to eventually to our fixed radius curve. So it's approximately, since we're about halfway through the curve, our midpoints should be more or less about halfway between these two curves. And so just as a reminder, that beginning of curve point is the intersection of our straight and our easement, and the end of curve point is the intersection of the easement and the circular curve. The last step, in a sense, is to connect the dots. So what we want to do is draw a freehand curve connecting the beginning of curve, the midpoint, and the end of curve. Now, the freehand curve, this could be freehand, or if you have a large French curve template, for instance, that also can work. We want to basically start through the beginning of curve, draw your line through your endpoint, midpoint, and then so then it smoothly goes into the end of curve. So with overall, these easements like this will help you improve the realism of your model railroad without not too much extra work. If you enjoyed this video, please give me a like. Please consider subscribing for more helpful hints, tips, and how-tos. And thank you for watching.